damn, that is a big boy. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and these chapters are getting out of hand. Unlike the hands of Luffy, which are getting into all sorts of places they shouldn't be, like the brain matter of Kaido. Ugh. And again, there's nothing I can really say to make this chapter feel wackier than it already is. So the limited edition in-context summary of chapter 1045 is as follows. Battle of Gods. Onigashima has been elevated not only above the nation of Wano, but also above the entire mortal realm, through the battle between Sun God Luffy and Fish God Kaido. This has become unquestionably the greatest battle in 25 years of One Piece, and we still have yet to reach the pinnacle. Meanwhile, Monkey D. Doggo is currently locked in battle with the dastardly Dog Flamingo, and he needs all of your pat power to win. Luckily for every person who subscribes to this channel, Monkey D. Doggo will receive one pat. So subscribe generously and help this good boy on his quest. Now, for all of the madness, this week was actually a very standard type of One Piece chapter, which I would classify as general action. And I guess the weird thing is, usually these kind of chapters are definitely my least favorite because you tend to blast through them super quickly and there's not a lot of story development or substance and stuff like that. But 1045, it is a different beast entirely. I would go so far as to say that this is my favorite general action chapter in the entire series, and by quite a long stretch as well, and pun mostly intended, because I didn't just blast through it. I actually found myself getting stuck on pages even more so than I do with the very dialogue-heavy chapters, because everything that was happening was just so wonderfully absurd that from time to time I just had to pause in order to fully comprehend what my eye things were seeing. As expected, these Toon powers, they're getting out of hand in the best way possible, and there's a certain moment, like when Luffy's hands stretch inside Kaido's eyeballs and grab his nose, that I just need to slow down and appreciate the madness happening in front of my own eyes, which thankfully do not contain any Luffys. I mean, to be fair, this isn't the first time that Luffy has been inside the eyes of a giant snake creature. Remember when he got stuck in Nola on Skypiea? So if anything, this sort of eye infiltration is becoming a bit of a Luffy trademark. But something that continues to just bewilder me is how Luffy affects those around him. Because Kaido, sure, that makes some degree of sense. I mean, no it doesn't, because that's kind of the point, but you get what I mean. Or you will once I tell you. Luffy is making physical contact with Kaido. And so I guess, yeah, that means you can manipulate him how you please. But what I found super bizarre was when Luffy's giant head popped through the hole in the roof and everyone else's eyes popped out of their skulls. Luffy didn't even come close to touching them and they were all still at the mercy of Toon physics. And it's actually now becoming kind of difficult to distinguish reality, or I guess what passes for One Piece reality, from Luffy's powers. Because One Piece, yeah, it's always been that kind of wacky series with all sorts of stylistic choices that you can't really take as something that literally happened. But all of this is literally happening. And I think it hits particularly hard when you see a character like Trafalgar Law with his eyes popping out of his skull, because he's not someone who traditionally gets used for the kind of slapstick aspect of One Piece. And I'm not gonna lie, this whole eyeball thing is kind of eerie. Like, I know the eyeball thing, it's a classic staple of rubber hose comedy, but when you see it as a still of Law's disembodied eyes, it kind of creeps me out a bit. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sold on this effect as drawn in the manga, which is something I imagine the anime will handle very well, because the eye-popping gags are much more natural in that medium, where everything happens in an instant, and you don't have the option of lingering on an image for too long. The Toon powers are also quite legitimately scary at times, and here I'm definitely referring to the final attack of the chapter, where Luffy just puts his fist straight through Kaido's head. It's simultaneously awesome and funny, but also kind of uncomfortable. As I mentioned last week, this kind of stuff works in cartoons because everyone in those worlds is subject to the same fictional physics. Whereas it's a bit weirder to see a more realistic character like Kaido being punched straight through the mind brain. So for example, if you saw that happen to someone you knew in real life, your first reaction probably wouldn't be to, crap your pants in a fit of lulz. I imagine it would be a bit more, gasp, shock, and horror, which is one of the many reasons why this chapter gripped me more than usual. It wasn't just taking the time to enjoy the wacky, because there were points where I was legitimately like, damn, this is a whole new genre of physical violation. We were also introduced to some limitations though. Luffy ran out of steam quite quickly in Gear 5th and did commence the process of dying. I loved what broke him out of it though, because essentially what happened is, I guess he kind of smooth talked himself back into living, but he did it with 4 names. Saitama, Momonosuke Kinemon, and the one that surprised me, Pedro. Because I get that Luffy was distraught by his sacrifice, but I don't think I've ever quite understood just how much Pedro's actions meant to Luffy. To think that he's now on the verge of death fighting an Emperor of the Sea, and 25% of the reason why he talks himself out of dying is Pedro. I found it really touching, and I'm glad that Pedro's will exists in a character who isn't Carrot or Nekomamushi. It's great to see that his life, like so many other mentors and allies, has had a profound effect on this world. And right here, right now, Pedro's will is contributing to the defeat of an emperor. Now, with that said, this whole on the verge of death thing does have me a little bit nervous, because sure, let's play this out. Kaido is defeated, Wano is saved, hooray. The sun rises and stuff, but what's next? What is the immediate desperate desire that causes Luffy to cling back to life? Because as it is right now, he is dying and he will die. And the continued use of this power is only making that death thing worse, if it can get worse. Suppose you can only really take it to a certain point and then it's not too bad. So it feels like one of those situations where someone is going to have to step in and save Luffy's life once he's done his part with all of the punch fighting. As for who that is, I'm not entirely sure. But I will say that thank the Lord of Rubber that we do currently have a talking elephant who is probably more familiar with the madness playing out before our Toon infested eyes. Also, just a fun miscellaneous thing. One of my favorite parts about this chapter was the very beginning where Luffy was just bouncing on the floor, because that is exactly what would happen. Luffy realizes that he can turn his environment into rubber, and therefore the first thing he would do is obviously create just a fun bouncy castle, even mid-battle, because that's just who Luffy is. And I suppose that brings us to Giant Luffy. And this is easily the most awesome moment of the entire chapter, and something that long-term readers of One Piece have been waiting for a very long time. Seeing Giant Luffy took me all the way back to the days of reading Any Slobby Weekly and the revelation of Gear 3rd. After that happened, there was a lot of discussion about how Luffy had finally found a way to fight against particularly powerful giants, and that eventually he would probably find a way to inflate his entire body. Now granted, it did take about 700 more chapters until we reached that point, but here we are now, and my god, it is everything I was hoping for and more. This is definitely the closest that Luffy has come to looking like a literal god, in the sense that we understand mythological beings like the Titans, the Olympians, and so on and so forth. You know, those guys. I mean, let's put it this way. Luffy's giant form makes Kaido's dragon form look unimpressive. And I remember when we first saw that thing back in Act 1 of Wano. It was one of the most mind-blowing, insane existences that had ever been showcased in One Piece. And now Luffy has reduced that majesty and intimidation to the level of a pet garden snake. And it's a spread that I've just spent far too long looking at, not even thinking while I'm looking, just staring in complete awe of these black and white drawings on paper. It also kind of reminds me of Luffy's final attack against Golden Lion Shiki in Strong World, where he stuck his giant foot up into the thunderclouds and then stepped on Old Man Shiki. Except this time he decided to use Kaido as a jump rope, which was just so good. It was the kind of moment that I never would have even begun to think of the potential of, but this whole chapter really was just a display of pure imagination. Sort of like when you're young and you're making two of your toys fight in really bizarre, dumb ways. That's what this chapter felt like. I think Gear 5th is very important because it's freed Eiichiro Oda on so many levels. Firstly, because yes, he does have the childlike imagination to think of all of these weird things, and the Toon powers are a perfect vehicle for his boundless creativity, but it also gives him a very satisfying answer to the problem of Kaido. Now, many of you probably won't remember this because a lot of you probably wouldn't have been reading One Piece back then, but in 2017, Oda conducted an interview where he stated that he wasn't sure how Luffy was going to beat Kaido. And in a rather adorable way, he said that he and Luffy would have to figure that out along the way. And he also said that he knew fans wouldn't be satisfied by something like Kaido gets beaten by like a very powerful punch. And 5 years later, it's really satisfying to see the solution that he and Luffy landed on, because Kaido has been a very problematic character in One Piece, by which I mean he has the problem that automatically comes with being labeled the strongest thing in the world. The most powerful creature in the world is supposed to be precise. However, when the creatures our main character has been dealing with amounts to little more than crafty crocodiles, lawful leopards, and of course flamboyant flamingos, then it becomes a pretty big leap to defeat the most powerful mythical dragon boss thing in all of ever. I mean, just to recap, Luffy has had 3 whole power-ups on Wano, and he is only just now able to play in the same arena as Kaido. I don't think I can recall a single shonen series where the protagonist has needed 3 drastic power-ups in quick succession just to beat the bad guy. But Gear 5th, or I suppose the true nature of Luffy's Devil Fruit, is the perfect solution. In terms of power scaling, Luffy's already put in all of the hard work via Haki, but that was never going to be enough. He still needed that one convincing edge, and completely messing with reality is a great solution in my opinion. I mean, for example, there was this amazing panel where Kaido struck Luffy with his club with full-on infused Conqueror's Haki, and it just resulted in a hilarious panel of Luffy having like a bunch of face spikes. Looking back on it, I do feel like this is the only convincing road we could have taken. Simply becoming stronger and hitting harder like every other shonen protagonist would have been quite boring, which is something to remember, I suppose. This awakening doesn't make Luffy stronger. He's not hitting Kaido harder all of a sudden, he's not moving faster, it's not like a Super Saiyan style thing. What it does is make Luffy more versatile. It expands his potential pool of attacks and defenses to a level where it's now incredibly difficult for Kaido's own very straightforward strength to break through. So we haven't become stronger than Kaido. What we've done is more or less neutralize the Emperor and brought him back down to an achievable Earth, rather ironically, by breaking all of the fictional laws of in-world physics. Admittedly, it does sound a bit ridiculous and kind of like an arsehole when you say it out of context, but that's because this would never work for a character that isn't Luffy. I mean, I could never imagine Naruto, Ichigo, or Gokugo performing this kind of wacky shenaniganry and having it be satisfying. No, they need to stick to their cool, sleek power-ups. The ones that make them all angry and neutral-faced and power. Luffy, however, has always been less of a driven hero and far more of a court jester. Almost every fight he's ever been in has had some sort of comic aspect involved. Remember that time when he tried to beat Crocodile by literally eating him? You know, stuff like that. But even then, it's only after 25 years of wacky fights that we can finally satisfactorily cross the line into something as ridiculous as Gear 5th. But even then, we still find ourselves in the same spot as we were at the end of chapter 1044. Gear 5th is fun, Luffy is fun. The question is, what is Kaido going to do about it? Even after everything we've been through, I can't help but feel like he's still holding back and has yet to enter a point where he's utilizing 100% of the abilities possessed by the strongest creature in the world. But luckily, unlike Kaido's face, next week there is no break, so I guess we will be finding out very shortly. Until then, here's another video because there's always more to learn, explore, and experience with this wonderful series, so I look forward to seeing you there.